Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to come on and have a chill, casual chat with you about a type of tarot slump that I've been having, or tarot lull, whatever term you prefer. And it's something that after a few months I thought might be interesting to come and discuss here, especially because it's not reflective of my whole entire tarot practice. I am still using the cards and I'm definitely still spending time with them, but a lot of the time it's in a different capacity than simply tarot reading for myself. And I figured that rather than get into all the types, I'd just come and share where I'm at, how I'm manoeuvring through that. And also I do have a couple of things that have been helpful for me in the past for different kind of tarot slump or lulls, but that's really just added on at the end for anyone who's interested. So I've not really prepped this video too much. I've just grabbed a few bits that are relevant to what I wanted to talk about. And so this particular tarot slump lull that I'm in is more reflective of personal reading as opposed to reading for others, teaching, which obviously only really happens on my Patreon, but it does happen over there, and then tarot studies and explorations. So still doing those, personal tarot reading, definitely an interesting shift, and I think lull probably fits where I'm at better, but you know, slump's a common term. So where I'm at the moment is that reading cards has been pretty infrequent, if I'm honest, and I know that if I up that right now that I won't get into the readings. It's something that I enjoy doing with my particular readings, unless I'm pulling like a couple of cards for fun, or I do have a much lighter, or did have a much lighter daily card practice. I've had a break from that as well. But with my other readings, I really like to get into them. So what I mean by that, I like to get into the invitation and work with it after, not just be with what comes up and do the reflective process, but like have it as a, I don't want to say a contingency plan, but like take in the messages, take in the invitations, do something with that, actualize what I am reflecting on or being with the process of what it brings up for me, rather than it just being that moment in time. And that is work and energy, and depending on obviously what we're working on and what readings we're doing, like again, some processes take a lot longer than others. I definitely have that sensation sometimes of just not feeling a desire or a need to pull any cards, to do any kind of exploration like that. So unless I'm then using my tools in other ways, so like I use divination in terms of some spirit working stuff, but that's very separate, and I also use them, I use cards for some spellcraft stuff or ritual stuff, which again very separate, and I will mention a couple of. But when it comes to the actual reading at the moment, I'm not feeling like I want to pull cards very often or pull very many cards. I just don't have very many questions, and that's pretty reflective of the liminal space that I'm in at the moment, a liminal space which is not induced, you know, not purposefully created. There's nothing magic based or journey based or anything like that going on in which I've welcomed this space. It's just one that's happened of its own natural occurrence, and like a lot of liminality, there can be that discomfort there, right? Of just not necessarily wanting to get out of it, but just having a shift and not always being fully formed with all of it yet, not being fully conscious of what all of it means, you know. And so as that experience has remained with me for some time, in being what it is without having a specific intent with that, naturally my card pulling has shifted. And if I do pick up the odd daily card, or at the moment I'm using, I don't have the box with me, I'm using the 𝗬𝗂𝗍𝗂 oracle to pull cards because 'tis the season. I'm really just enjoying it as a daily invitational energy, but it's far less directive, far less sort of deep dive, explorative, developmental, and even my type of reflection process has like a nuanced change to it. One of the things I was thinking about though when I was reflecting on my tarot practice and other lulls, quieter periods, even slumps, breaks from tarot, I think that a lot of this is natural, especially when reading predominantly for ourselves. At least for me, that's how it feels. I used to read for others a lot more. I used to sell readings at one point. And so I was using the cards always, but it wasn't often focused on me. As I say, I do some teaching in Patreon, you know, shared experience, offerings, techniques. I intertwine therapeutic tools with divination and animal gnosis and other stuff. So again, I am using the cards, but it's not as much reading for others at the moment. And I do believe there's only so much I can read for myself in the way that I want, at least. I mean, we can read for ourselves as much as we want. Like, knock yourself out. I'm not here to debate anyone else's reading, but for me, especially when I'm not perhaps feeling that playful with the readings, then, you know. But play does come into this in different ways, and I do find other uses for the cards than simply reading for myself. So as I say, I'm wanting to save that time for the cards, for working and utilising what they bring up, you know, within my approach to them and my gnosis of what tarot is and does and all of that stuff. So I expect to have these quiet periods anyway, but they do still unsettle me sometimes, just a bit. I hadn't particularly anticipated this one prior to it, you know, just coming and sweeping into my practice. And usually come September, which is something quite seasonal for me and cyclical, my reading and everything, my ritual, everything really ups the ante and I do more. And instead I'm noticing that, I suppose more in line with like final harvests and things like that, I'm actually really paring back a lot at the moment. So it's an interesting space to be in. I know I haven't shown you much. This is very casual and chatty, but I am about to show you some stuff too whilst I talk. What I thought I would do, after hopefully giving you some form of an insight into what I'm talking about, because I don't feel like it needs a mass introduction. I couldn't even give you one. Like, I'm simply at where I'm at. And I thought I would share with you what I am enjoying and what I am doing with the cards at the moment, because maybe this will be relevant to someone else, or maybe it will help you in some way. Maybe it's just interesting. I don't know. So what I am enjoying is talking about the cards, journal-wise or with others. So again, on my Patreon, hopefully on here a bit more. And in more of like a conceptual, thematic or exploratory way as well, away from actual readings. So conceptualizing cards, saying themes. Where's one of the books? So, I mean, I'm not going to take credit for this, obviously, because it's not my book. I own it. I did not write it. Tarot and psychology, something that loads of us like to, or a decent handful of us like to blend, right? So this is what I mean by sort of conceptualizing or seeing it through a theme. This is just one example of this, and as a psychotherapist, of course, this really interests me. And so what 𝗪𝘀 does in this book is conceptualize tarot in psychological terms through the psychological lens. Obviously, not everything has to be done in such a big way. It could be far smaller. So just and this comes more under play, so I won't go into it too much right this second, but just the joys of the autumnal deck videos and the Halloween deck videos and the, I don't know, summer deck videos and whatever it is. Sometimes I get sick of them, sometimes I'm really excited for them. Depends on my mood, but you know, I especially love joining in on the what's your creepy decks, what's your dark decks, what's your Halloween decks. I like to go deeper and talk about the actual cards as well, but I do find it quite fascinating how we theme, how we genre, how we view our decks. So that's perhaps a lighter way. One of the others, this isn't a tarot book at all, and when I show books, these aren't book reviews, nor are they recommendations. I'm sure that I would recommend all of the books, or at least most of the books that I'm going to show, but I also would have significant critiques about them as well. So just know that off the bat, please. There is some, this is old, this is got some old writing in it, it's got some fantastically out of date, like, just, yeah, not okay things to say in it. Just a note, just a side note. But obviously, again, because of my training, but also because of my interests, this is a book that I find very interesting, and I enjoy fitting concepts to the cards. So how we might meet the shadow through various tarot cards. Very popular. Sometimes people's approach to shadow work isn't actually the therapeutic model, but obviously this book is. But one of the other examples that I thought I would talk about, which is why I've got this deck here, which, because I'm going to get asked, this deck is the Antique Anatomy Tarot Ephemera. This is not my indie copy, this is my mass market copy. But if you're in the UK, it's not actually called that, it's called like Modern Tarot Reader, or I don't know what happened with a UK publisher, but anyway, it's a Black and the Moon deck. I am going to show you all the cards that I did this with, but I'm not going to talk about them in depth, otherwise I'm going to be giving away my Patreon content for free, and you know, that doesn't work out well for anyone, and I'm not here to piss off my Patreons. But in Patreon last month, so September, I spoke about liminality. It was the theme of the month. Sometimes I don't theme every single month over there heavily, but certainly when I want to talk about lots of ways it shows up, then I do. And we got into it, like how liminality was showing up for me, processes in animal gnosis, the animal of the month, tarot cards that it shows up in, other areas of my my witch practice. Anyway, one of the things that I enjoyed was talking about liminal tarot cards, and it was a really interesting thing to go through anyway, because what I will say before I show you the cards that I chose is there are definitely more that I could have spoken about. I had written many words by this point and no one would have read more. Secondly, I don't even think that these are necessarily inherently liminal all the time. Querent, question, reader, you know, all of that stuff comes into play. And then I'm not here to make anyone else feel that they're liminal if they're not either. So I think that these processes alone are a really interesting way to explore tarot beyond reading for ourselves and add to the process of how we read anyway, right? Everything that we do with tarot cards, mostly, I would imagine, has an impact on how we read. It benefits it, unless we just look at their boxes on, you know, our bookshelf, but you get what I mean. So the ones that I particularly chose for this liminal discussion, because it seems unfair to not at least show you the ones that I chose, were the High Priestess and the Moon, which I paired. I'm not telling you why, sorry. And then I did a liminal story transition through the Hanged Man, Death, and then Temperance, because they're really interesting, grouped together through liminality. And then, because I wanted to mix it up a bit, and this is something I had been thinking about a lot longer before the majors, was the sevens as a grouping. So every single 7. I freaking love the artwork on these cards. I'm also sorry if I'm jiggling the camera a bit today. It's I told you I've gone for a casual setup, so it is what it is. But yes, the 7s, and specifically numerically, because again, if we're looking at schools of thought and approaches of tarot, that's going to have an impact too, because how the 7s are seen as a number, as a collective, might not be how the 7s show up in the Rider-Waite-Smith. So that is one of the examples of like how I really enjoy talking about things like that. We did something recently as well on the actual tarot podcast. We did a cult episode in September talking about cult cards and who they remind us of in fiction and why as well. Which again, very, very fun, really helpful way to expand our exploration of the cults especially. So just contemplating themes in groupings, what connects certain cards, especially like the less obvious ones. So I don't know if the High Priestess and the Moon are entirely a less obvious one, but perhaps less obvious than the Lovers and the Devil card, especially where the imagery like intertwines those two. But yeah, what connects to certain cards, what groups them together, what themes can we find? And in doing that, that gets me into more of like an exploring artwork theme and more of like a playful idea. So exploring the cards, and this is the 𝗫𝗁𝗁𝗀𝗁𝗁 Tarot, which I love. I love doing this with this as well, exploring artwork, but I have got another deck as well because I appreciate that this is very far from what a lot of people recognise tarot to be. But exploring artwork and really with these ones doing some journeying with them on the altar, either really going into journey work or if I'm not feeling up to it, like doing it in more of an observatory way. So it doesn't always have to be like a experiential journey. Sometimes just visualising and talking myself through, like, does this feel warm or cold to me? What time of day it is? I would definitely feel the sun on my skin in this picture. Maybe a cool breeze from the winding lake. How I feel, what colours stand out to me, what season it speaks to me of. Some of these are very particular to this, you know, this deck. This card, I think I've spoken about before somewhere, but I can't remember where. The first time that I saw this card and this card, actually it was this one that started it, which is possibly why they're still together at the moment. I felt really, really emotional. I got this deck at a time when apparently I really needed to let that out and I hadn't been, and it took me by surprise. Just the greyness of it, the crashing waves, the whole imagery, just really sort of immersing myself in it, like I said, in an experiential way. rather than thinking about just what the Five of Swords means, getting into my more analytical aspect. You know, I've done a bit of that with the other way of approaching it. You can get really playful with this. You may even, I don't know, I'm trying to think of, because that's as far as I sort of go with this, but in sort of the realms of trying to be useful to other people, I suppose, as well. You might even stick it up on your altar, pop it on your fridge. You may put some music on that connects you with a particular card. I could definitely do that with this deck, like nature sounds. It would be awesome. If you're a crystal person or a stone person, or I don't know, talisman, you might pick up one that makes you feel connected to the card for the day. If you're out of the house, take a picture of it and put it on your phone screen. The spending time with the artwork, the contemplating why the colours, why perhaps this person picked what they picked for this particular deck. And of course in other decks that have got people or symbols, this isn't really a traditional deck, it's just slightly more traditional. Apparently I'm not showing you anything actually traditional today. This is the Story Medicine Tarot. Nope. This is why. What the hell is this deck called? Animal Woman. Story Medicine Tarot, the Animal Woman edition. It's a mouthful because the Story Medicine, there's like 3 of these decks now, but they're all very, very different. With this one, I might contemplate why the symbols, why the animal, what the statements that are on the cards bring up for me. Some decks have got more traditional symbols, so you might get into those as well. But it really, for me, it works with any deck, and this is another one that I am feeling more drawn to of late. I enjoy this one for exploring the artwork, contemplating the colour, thinking about what the animal means to me, the transitionary process of what's going on, the repetition of the words as like a mantra, because this is a pretty gentle deck as well. Like if anyone's, maybe visually it's quite challenging visually sometimes. I really love some of the difficult like layer shedding and rebirthing that goes on, but in terms of the actual statements on the deck, very, very gentle, very chill. And I think that we don't have to, you could argue that that's still reading cards, and it is in a way. We are still sort of reading cards, just maybe not in a traditional way. I'm not reading it and thinking about what I can do with this, how I can, in this instance anyway, how I can move with it, how it's even shown up. It's a much more, I suppose, like an extension of mindfulness prompted by a card. So it wasn't already there, I've pulled the card, but then the mindfulness is being with it, being with the colour. Maybe you're someone who does get your senses prompted by visuals, and then you get smells and sounds and all that good stuff as well. Or maybe you'll look for it in the rest of your day. And there are definitely ways that I enjoy being with cards that come up time and time again for me, even when I'm in what I'm, like I said, referring to as a reading lull. Sometimes it's hard to describe in its entirety some of the things that I do, merely because I've either forgotten, I've not got the best memory, or because it's such a natural process that it's not really laid out in a linear fashion in my mind. It just sort of happens. And aside from making some notes on it, some of it just, it's its own sort of entity. It's become its own living being practice. But yes, and then going creatively, I like to utilise therapeutic activities with the artwork of tarot. I think that you can use tarot in many different ways, as well as reading tarot. or at least even oracle. Like, doesn't have to be tarot specific, it's just I'm talking about tarot, but this counts for oracle as well. Like, I'm not reading more oracle but not reading tarot. This is kind of an across the board card reading lull. So I create a lot of things like that. Obviously I have the benefit of my career and my training and my experience, but there's a lot of activity books out there created by people in the field that share that stuff. There's a lot of stuff like that online. There's a lot of people doing other creative exercises as well. Again, some of those get right into reading for ourselves, which of course, if you're in a reading lull, not useful. But some of them are much more creative and playful and expressive, and I don't know, it just, if we're really getting into the nuances, like I said, what is reading cards for ourselves? You could argue it, but it sort of exists across a spectrum, and I'm not traditionally reading the cards for myself very much at the moment, but I am studying them in all these different ways. I did mention earlier grouping decks together, if that's something that you enjoy doing, if it's something that makes you curious. This is definitely born of my neurodivergency, putting decks together and cards together via colours, and the ways that I used to group my toys and stuff together and line them up. But there are ways to explore this just from a fun curiosity. I mean, for me that's interesting anyway, right? But to make it more applicable to everyone, how many of these cards, for example, have this grey, cloudy, overcast kind of vibe to them? How does that connect to the cards together? Not because they're just necessarily all fives, which these three are, because there are some grey ones that aren't, but like, what else does it make you think about them? What else does it make you feel about that grouping? Or like I said, I recently got all of the decks out that reminded me of Halloween. I did like a mini video of it, and I was being very specific as well. So not autumn, not necessarily any kind of sort of creepy, macabre, but specifically like reminds me of Halloween. And just considering like what I like and why it works for me visually. It's another way to me, as playful as it is, of getting intimate with the cards in a deck rather than just reading with them. And again, that's not to make light of reading, because reading is the way we learn. But once you're in it and you're a perpetual student, which most of us can agree that even though you get to stages where we can teach and share, that there's always aspects of learning going on. So when we're in that, like, sometimes it's nice to take a break from that and simply have an intimate experience with the cards in other ways, rather than feeling like every time I've got to, like, I get my deck out, I've got to pull cards for myself. I feel like it's, to me, I would argue it's foundational relationship building, in that getting to know you phase, or getting to know you more, or reacquainting. Like, it's like sitting down and having a coffee or a herbal tea, or I don't know, whatever, a whiskey, pick your poison, a water, with your deck, and asking questions, making assumptions, or, you know, you could pull cards and have that conversational thing if you wanted to. Again, I've not necessarily been inclined to do that side of it, but definitely like the questioning what this deck feels like to me, the personality that shines through at the moment, just having that projection onto the deck as well, and leaning into the aesthetic vibes that I enjoy is something that then coaxes me into a little bit more of a light daily reading, and not forcing that deeper meaning or divination in this particular period of time. That's kind of me where I'm at. I'm sure I've missed things that I would have wanted to share and say, but I like the idea of these more casual chats. I watch quite a few people who have that approach and I enjoy it, so I think it's It's something that I definitely want to do as well. And it's something I do away from YouTube, but not necessarily very much here. What I wanted to add for others, which is not necessarily relevant to this present reading lull for me, but are just a couple more options that I think, I'm sure many people have mentioned in their own videos on these discussions. And these kind of sit on the opposite end of spectrums, I suppose, is dialing it back and going back to basics, whatever basics means to you, because that's a really great one for when we've become aware or we're maybe thinking that it's some form of overwhelm. And it might not even be overwhelm in tarot. It could be life overwhelm. And then it's like, fucking dialing stuff back is useful, right? Certainly my liminal space probably coincides with a bit of its own overwhelm anyway. And on the flip, there's discovering something new. So I figured I would talk about both really quickly as well, and then we will finish up. I have a book representation for both, just randomly for something to look at. And this one, whilst I said these aren't necessarily relevant to my practice, they're not things I'm doing this time, I have done both of these before. And this book just happens to fit in to one of them. 78 Degrees of Wisdom is like a classic for most people. And even though I was brought up around tarot from birth, this isn't a book that I had ever read, because I had read excerpts from it and just, you know, just didn't fancy it. I know, sacrilege. I recently found this you would never believe it by the quality of it, but very, very cheap in like a seconds section of a shop. And I was like, okay, I'll get this. But the reason that I picked this out is this is just an example. So specifically from what I understand and from the picture, a 𝗪𝗿𝗪𝗀𝗀 example, it's often that whether we're overwhelmed in life or we're actually overwhelmed in our practice, because I know that this is the case for me sometimes, which is something I've been far more mindful of in recent years. But I hear other people talk about it as well, is that when we've been studying everything, every little thing, and we've got our hands in all the jars, and overwhelm is definitely possible, because there's only so much time in a day, there's only so thin we can spread ourselves. And for me, it's about discerning where we're at. So firstly, if it's not just that the answer is that you want to break from tarot altogether, because I can assure anyone who is wary of this that many of us, including myself, have had breaks, will do so again, and will take time out. And it doesn't need to mean anything other than we're taking a break. For me, it's very much, rather than trying to sort of fortune tell what this means down the line, it's simply allowing myself the act of stepping away. So when we allow ourselves that can be quite powerful, and then we can manage and process through it accordingly. So if it's a while, or if you think having your stuff out on display, if in fact you do, is going to add to the overwhelm while you pause, you know, putting bits away for a longer period if you don't want to see them. But if you are thinking, no, it's a dialing back thing I want to go back to basics, sometimes getting a deck out that reminds us of back to basics. So for me, it wouldn't be the 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗀, it would be my Medicine Woman Tarot. Or it could be getting back to the basics of one of our systems, or our first system, or whatever it is. Then that could be a really fun thing to do. And I enjoy going back to basics sometimes, even in the midst of studying. Like, so many people have spoke about this book. I'm not suggesting it won't add any value or anything to my practice at all. It's also not going to be the same as if I'd found it or read it much sooner down the line. But it's still a really good way to, even sometimes to refresh, to get back into what it was that we used to sink our teeth into. Or I haven't had this, but a few people have said to me over the years they got so far into like the conceptualizing of cards and seeing them through different themes and symbols and concepts and all of that jazz, that they felt like a card could mean anything and everything, to a point of they wanted to come back to basics and sort of restructure that, reorganize it for themselves. And that is a really lovely way of doing that. Or on the flip, it could be that you want to discover and explore something new. So the lull might be that it's not feeling fresh anymore, that the study is feeling dry, the well of that the practice of it isn't enriching at that time. And it's not because of the readings, especially like I said, if we read for ourselves, usually there's only so many readings we can do. It's debatable what that means to any one person, but perhaps experiencing something new could like add that new layer. My book for this, I have obviously read this now, but it was a new layer when I got it. And this is by Tom Benjamin. So my example would be, perhaps if you're a ரிder-Waite-Smith reader that's never explored numerology or 𝗪𝗂𝗡, this would be much more appropriate for that. If you've only ever read with 𝗨 and you want to go into something else, it's about expanding. So first working out, do we want to break? Are we paring back or are we adding to? So like I said, definitely I'm not in a space of like adding to in this way at the moment, but that can be a really fun way of adding something fresh to our practice that gets us into that study mindset, that expansive mindset again. You may enjoy reading with symbol inclusions but have never studied the astrology in the cards, or perhaps you use very scenic decks but you've never used more pippish ones. You might love the modern tarot movement but you've never explored the history. Like, there's so many things. We're so freaking lucky when it comes to tarot and how it's moved out into, I suppose, I don't want to say into the masses because it's not quite that way, but the way that it's definitely expanded itself in terms of how many people speak to it, how many people make material that's accessible to us. There's usually someone on Patreon doing it at a really affordable price. If you can't afford to buy a book, there's usually someone on YouTube doing it. There's a lot of free stuff out there as well. And I think that even if it doesn't land and it's not the thing that you end up adding to your practice, sometimes it's really just exciting to stumble onto something new, just like the first time we found tarot or we were introduced to it, or even returning to it after a big break, you know, that revitalization, that spark that happens. Yeah, and there are a lot of freaking layers that that exist out there that can allow us that. I think that that's enough. This is probably quite long and I don't intend to edit it really, so I'm gonna finish up there. Hopefully that was interesting, maybe even useful, I don't know. I didn't really aim to come on and do a how to deal with a tarot lull. It was more of a where I'm at and this is how I'm processing through it, but here's some tips as well. I'll be really interested to hear just your thoughts, experiences, whatever it is you want to share in the comments below. And hopefully I'll be back soon with another video. Bye.